Welcome to a session on history of translation. To start with, we'll start from the antiquity. Translation is something that started back in the antiquity, and it was found in the ancient Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. We've seen examples of translation in ancient China and India, and also the Roman Empire. So the first instance or the first incident to be uh, thought about while we talk about the history of translation is the Babel myth, which is cited in the Genesis. It is the idea of having a unique language for the whole of mankind. However, the idea of one language was not acceptable. This is a myth. From the religious point of view, since that would make the humankind more stronger if it was one uh, language for all. It would make humans more powerful and it would be intolerable for God. As a result, God gave people different languages, only different languages to make them less powerful. So this is only considered to be a myth, and it's not, something that happened in reality. So it's considered to be a myth, and the origins of language have other linguistic explanations, but this is one of the first instances of having different languages. Now, Eugene Nida, one of the most important theorists when it comes to translation, places the beginning of translation with the production of the Septuagint, which seems to have been the first translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. Septuagint, sometimes it is referred to as the Greek Old Testament or translation of the 70, and often it is abbreviated as LXX. It is the earliest extant Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible from the original Hebrew. And it was carried out by 72 translators, and it provides us with the basic categories of the history of this practice. This American scholar states that translation itself was a science, a theory that was subsequently rejected by the others in the second half of the century. So translation was not accepted for a very long time. Now, following Douglas Robinson's definition, the history of translation goes back to the ancient times with the distinction of the word for word translation, that is literal translation, which is also called as verbum pro verbo, and sense for sense, that is free translation or sensum pro sensu. So these were the two types of, we have a transition from word for word translation to sense for sense translation employed for the first time by Marcus Tullius Cicero. And Cicero pointed out that one should not translate word for word, verbum pro verbo, and opened a debate that has continued for surgery, whether or not we should go for word translation. And it is important to cite Horace, Pliny, and other theorists who were involved in the beginning of translation. And the etymology of translation, it is transducere, which means to bring across. That is the meaning. It is a Latin word. And Nida defines the concept in a more systematic way. Translating consists in reproducing in the receptor language the closest natural equivalent of the source language message. So the source language message is being reproduced in the receptor language using the closest natural equivalent in the target language, first in terms of meaning and second in terms of style. So it is always the prominence or importance is given to the meaning and then to the style. So the onset of new theories when it comes to translation studies by the beginning of the 20th century, to learn a foreign language in some countries consisted in doing it through what was called the grammar translation method, whose origins can be found in the way Latin and Greek used to be approached. And this way of studying a language was later applied to modern languages, which concentrated on learning the grammatical rules of the target language and carrying out a literal translation. So translation exercises were considered to be a way of learning a foreign language. So in order to study a foreign language, translation was the first methodology used to teach or study the new language. Later on, grammar translation method lost its popularity, and slowly the importance of communicative approach came into the arena by the late 1960s and 70s. This method focused on the natural ability of the students to learn a new language and attempted to represent the daily routine in classrooms, focusing on spoken language instead of using the sentences. So as a consequence, this new approach entailed the abandoning of the translation method in its classical form. The communicative approach was used, rather than the grammar translation method. So slowly that importance of translation was lost somehow. In the second half of the 20th century, a new generation of scholars worked on the same target to establish a more systematic analysis of translation. All of them favored a closer linguistic approach. With the emergence of these new theories, a new discipline arose, the theory of translation or translation studies, also called as traductology or traductologia. These are the terms used that refer to the translation studies. And the concept of translation refers to two fields, the product and the process. Product is the book to be translated or the work to be translated, and process is the process of translation. And during the 1980s, Newmark highlighted the fact that there was not much written about the history of theory of translation or traductology. Um, so new contributions were necessary in the field, and the British scholar stresses that Nida was the first linguist, Eugene Nida was the first linguist, and he also highlights the rejection of the proposition that translation is a science and insisted on seeing this proposition as a theory of communication. Newmark's main contribution to the discipline is the distinction he establishes between the concept of communicative and semantic translation. The intention of the text, the translator has to forget about his or her own views about a subject and translate it following the author's intention and never alter it. So this is one of the concepts that are considered to be important in this field, that we should never, a translator should be never, changing the intention of the author. And the intention of the translator, whether she or he is trying to reproduce the emotiveness of the original or whether he or she is trying to combine the cultural sense of the source language. The reader and the setting of the text. The translator has to think who is the reader, what is the age, the sex, the class, education, all these things are to be kept in mind while translating. Finally, the quality of writing and authority of the text is also to be looked by the translators. So these are the four things to be seen: the author's intention, the emotiveness of the original and the cultural sense of the source language, the reader and the setting of the text, and also the quality and writing and authority of the text. Thank you.